The storm didn't just rage, it screamed. Rain fell in jagged silver sheets, slashing against the pavement with enough force to send droplets exploding back into the air like shattered glass. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling street signs and tearing leaves from their branches, carrying them into the darkness like discarded memories. The scent of wet asphalt mixed with something deeper, something lonelier. The damp, musky odor of abandonment, of things left behind and forgotten. And there, in the shadow of the shelter's overhang, sat a cardboard box. It was a pathetic thing, sagging under the weight of the rain, its edges dissolving into pulp. A single strip of frayed duct tape clung stubbornly to one side, the last remaining proof that someone, at some point, had cared enough to try and keep it closed. Now, it gaped open like a wound. Inside, curled so tightly he might have been mistaken for a pile of soaked rags, was a German Shepherd puppy. His fur, golden in daylight, now dull and darkened by the storm, clung to his tiny frame in dripping clumps. His ribs, too pronounced for a puppy his age, rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Every exhale sent a shudder through his body, his muscles trembling not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something worse. Fear. He didn't understand. One moment, he had been pressed against the warm, familiar weight of his mother, her heartbeat a steady drum beneath his paws. The next, cold, darkness, the slam of a car door, the roar of an engine, and then, nothing. He had cried at first, high-pitched, desperate whimpers that clawed their way out of his throat, each one a plea. "Don't leave me! Don't leave me! Don't—" But the rain swallowed his cries. The wind stole them. No one came. Now exhausted, he lay still. His nose, still pink and soft with puppyhood, pressed against the soaked cardboard beneath him. The world smelled like rain and diesel and something sharp. Fear sweat, his own. His amber eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were dull, uncomprehending. Why did they leave me? The question looped in his mind, wordless but aching. Had he done something wrong? Had he not been enough? A gust of wind hit the box, tilting it dangerously. The puppy whimpered, his claws scrabbling against the slippery bottom. For a heartbeat the world tilted. Then the box righted itself, but the damage was done. A fresh wave of terror crashed over him. He tucked his tail tighter, his body folding in on itself like a dying leaf. Time blurred. The rain slowed. The wind died. Somewhere in the distance, a streetlight flickered to life, its orange glow barely piercing the gloom. Then, a sound. The creak of a door. The puppy's head lifted, ears twitching. His heart, already racing, kicked into a frantic gallop. A woman stood in the shelter's doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light behind her. She gasped, her breath forming a cloud in the chilly air. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice was soft, cracked, like she was the one about to cry. The puppy stared up at her, his eyes wide. He didn't move, didn't wag his tail. Just waited. The woman knelt, her knees hitting the wet pavement with a slap. Her hands, when they reached for him, were gentle, warm. The puppy tensed. But then, her fingers brushed his fur, and something inside him broke. A whine escaped him, so quiet it was barely there. His body trembled, not from the cold now, but from something else, something raw. The woman made a sound, half sob, half laugh, as she lifted him. The cardboard box fell away, forgotten. The puppy blinked up at her, his gaze filled with a silent, desperate plea. "Don't leave me too." And as she cradled him against her chest, as her warmth seeped into his frozen fur, the puppy did something he hadn't done since the car drove away. He hoped. The shelter breathed. Its walls pulsed with life, not the warm, comforting kind, but something restless, something desperate. The air hummed with the vibrations of 100 different barks, each one layered over the next in a symphony of need. High-pitched yips from the puppy pens, deep throaty woofs from the older dogs, and beneath it all, the constant rhythmic scratching of claws against concrete. The sound of creatures who didn't understand why they were caged. Leo learned the language of this place quickly. Mornings arrived with the screech of metal gates and the sharp chemical bite of disinfectant. Workers moved through the aisles with mops and buckets, their rubber boots squeaking against the wet floors. Leo would press his nose against the bars, inhaling the sterile sting of cleaning solutions that couldn't quite mask the underlying sense of fear and urine. The ammonia burned his nostrils, but he didn't pull away. The discomfort was something to focus on, better than the hollow ache in his chest. By afternoon, the shelter transformed. Footsteps, always more footsteps. The click of dress shoes, the squeak of sneakers, the heavy thud of work boots. Leo learned to distinguish them. The fast, skipping steps of children usually meant excitement, high voices squealing, "This one, Mommy? Look at this one." The slower, measured paces of adults often ended in hesitation, disappointment. He watched, day after day, as kennels emptied around him. The tiny terrier mix with floppy ears, gone in 2 days. The trio of squirming Labrador puppies, adopted before the week ended. Even the old hound dog with cloudy eyes found someone, but not Leo. At first he'd tried. He'd stood at the front of his kennel, his tail giving tentative wags when people passed. He'd cocked his head, his ears perking up in what he hoped was an endearing way. Once, he'd even barked, a single hopeful sound that echoed too loudly in the narrow space. The family in front of his cage had startled, then moved on. After that, he stopped trying. Now he sat in the far corner of his kennel, his back pressed to the cold concrete wall. If he curled tight enough, if he made himself small enough, maybe they wouldn't see him. Maybe they'd look right past him. It was better than the alternative, than watching their eyes skim over him and settle on another dog, another better dog. The worst part wasn't the rejection. It was the silence after closing time. When the last family left and the lights dimmed, the shelter didn't truly quiet. Whimpers still echoed through the corridors, the occasional mournful howl. But the absence of human voices made the space feel heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on Leo's ribs. He'd lie on his thin cot, his chin resting on his paws, and listen to the hum of the refrigerators in the staff room, the drip of a leaky faucet, the distant rumble of traffic outside, cars carrying people home to their loved ones. Then there was Maria. She came every Tuesday and Thursday, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Unlike the other volunteers, she didn't rush through her rounds. She lingered at each kennel, speaking softly to its occupant. When she reached Leo, she always knelt, bringing herself to his level. "There's my lion-hearted boy," she'd murmur, her voice warm as sunlight. Leo would lift his head, just a little. Maria smelled like lavender and the peppermint gum she always chewed. Her hands, when they reached through the bars, were gentle. She never grabbed, never forced, just offered. Her touch, her treats, her time. Today, she held out a piece of chicken. Real chicken, not the dry kibble he usually ate. Leo inched forward, his nose twitching. He took it carefully, his teeth barely grazing her fingers. "Good boy," Maria whispered. Her eyes, he noticed, looked suspiciously bright. For a moment, just a moment, Leo's tail stirred. A faint thump against the floor. Maria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Someone's out there for you, Leo." "I know it." Leo lowered his head. He wanted to believe her. Wanted it so badly his chest ached. But the evidence was all around him, in the empty collars hanging by the door, in the fading echoes of adopted dogs, in the way his own reflection in the water bowl looked more defeated every day. Maria sighed and stood, brushing off her jeans. As she walked away, Leo watched her shadow stretch long across the floor. Then the lights flickered off, and he was alone again. Outside, a car engine turned over. A door slammed. Somewhere, someone was going home. Leo closed his eyes and tried not to wonder if he'd ever know what that felt like. The shelter air hung thick with the scent of anxiety and bleach, a cocktail that made Ellie's nose wrinkle as she stepped inside. All around her, chaos erupted, dogs hurling themselves against kennel bars, tongues lolling between barks, paws scrabbling for purchase on smooth metal floors. The noise was deafening, a physical force that vibrated through her sneakers and up her spine. Most kids her age would have rushed toward the front pens where the puppies bounced like wind-up toys, all oversized paws and clumsy enthusiasm. But Ellie walked differently. Her steps were slow, intentional. Her fingers trailed along the cold metal bars as she moved down the aisle, her sneakers squeaking against freshly mopped floors. She was searching. Not for the cutest dog, not for the smallest, but for something. A feeling. A connection. Then, she saw him. Tucked in the last kennel, where the overhead fluorescents flickered weakly, sat a German Shepherd puppy who didn't behave like a puppy at all. His golden fur lacked the usual puppy fluff, lying flat and dull against his frame. Where others jumped and yipped, he simply existed. A shadow among fireworks. Ellie froze. The world narrowed to that single kennel. The chatter of other families faded. The barking muted. It was just her, and the dog who looked at the floor like it held all the answers. Her knees hit the concrete before she realized she'd moved. Cold seeped through her jeans, but she didn't care. Up close, she could see the way his ribs pressed just slightly against his fur. Could see the dried tear tracks beneath his eyes. And then, he looked up. Their eyes met. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. His eyes weren't just brown. They were amber, shot through with gold like sunlight through honey. But the sadness in them? It was a living thing. A weight that pressed against her chest until breathing became difficult. She'd seen sadness before. In the stray cat behind her school who flinched at raised voices. In her grandfather's trembling hands when he spoke about the war. But this was different. This sadness had texture, depth. It had history. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the shelter noise. A miracle happened. The puppy's ears twitched. Not the frantic movements of the other dogs, but a slow, deliberate motion. Like he was testing whether he'd really heard her, whether she was real. Ellie's mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Honey," her voice was gentle but firm, "he's going to be a big dog. Maybe we should—" "No." Ellie didn't raise her voice, didn't turn around. But the single word carried surprising weight. Her fingers curled around the kennel bars, her knuckles whitening. "He's sad," she said simply, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Because in that moment, something extraordinary happened. A sound, soft as a falling leaf. Thump. The puppy's tail had touched the floor. Just once. A barely there movement that might have gone unnoticed if Ellie hadn't been watching so closely. Her heart stuttered. That tiny movement, that fragile attempt, was more precious than any enthusiastic wagging. Because this wasn't performative, wasn't trained. It was real. Ellie's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, hot and insistent. Without thinking, she reached her fingers through the bars, palm up in offering. The puppy stared at her hand. Ellie could see the war in his eyes, the instinct to withdraw battling something new, something fragile. Then, millimeter by millimeter, he leaned forward. His nose, cold and wet, brushed her fingertips. A spark. A connection. A beginning. Ellie's breath hitched. In that instant, she knew with absolute certainty, this wasn't just any dog. This was her dog. and she would move mountains to prove to him that not all humans leave. The shelter noise faded into a distant hum as Ellie settled onto the cold concrete floor, her legs folding beneath her like a pretzel. Her backpack hit the ground with a thump, spilling out colored pencils and a half-eaten granola bar she'd forgotten about. She ignored it all. For the first time since entering the shelter, the German Shepherd puppy before her was looking at her. Really looking. Not through her, not past her. At her. Ellie took a deep breath. "I read this book," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Charlotte's Web. About this pig who thinks he's going to die, but then this spider saves him." Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the floor. "I cried at the end. Not because it was sad, but because it was beautiful." Leo blinked. His ears, which had been pressed flat against his skull, twitched slightly forward. Encouraged, Ellie kept talking. She told him about Sunday mornings at home, how her dad always burned the pancakes because he got distracted reading the newspaper, how the smoke detector would shriek, and her mom would wave a dish towel at it, laughing. She described the baby bird she'd found last spring, its wing bent at an odd angle, how she'd kept it in a shoebox lined with tissues until it could fly again. "And when it flew away," Ellie said, her throat tightening, "I cried then too, but I was happy, because that's what was supposed to happen." Something shifted in Leo's posture. The tight coil of his body loosened, just a fraction. His paws, which had been tucked tightly beneath him, slid forward slightly. The concrete was rough against his pads, but he barely noticed. Ellie's hand, small and dotted with marker stains from art class, rose slowly. She didn't thrust it at him like others had. Didn't wiggle her fingers in that artificial, nice doggy way people did when they were nervous. She simply held it there, palm up, an invitation. Leo froze. Human hands had touched him before. Quick pats on the head from shelter workers, clinical examinations from veterinarians. Once, a child had poked him hard in the eye before being pulled away by embarrassed parents. But this hand smelled like pencil shavings and the strawberry soap from the school bathrooms. There was dirt under the nails, gardening dirt, rich and earthy. And it waited. Just waited. The tip of Leo's nose quivered as he sniffed the air. His muscles tensed, ready to recoil at the slightest threat. But Ellie didn't move, didn't flinch. One paw inched forward, then another. The concrete was cold against his belly as he dragged himself closer. His tail stayed tucked, old habits died hard, but his curiosity was winning the battle against his fear. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. She could see every detail now, the way his whiskers twitched with each breath, the scar on his muzzle. How had he gotten that? The faint tremor in his legs as he moved. Closer, closer. Then, contact. The cool, wet velvet of his nose brushed against her fingertips. Ellie's breath caught. It wasn't just the physical sensation, though that alone was enough to make her heart stutter. It was the trust in that simple touch, the monumental courage it must have taken for this broken creature to reach out. Leo didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the contact, his eyes slipping shut for one blissful moment. Ellie's fingers trembled as they traced the curve of his muzzle, marveling at the softness of his fur. "Mom! Dad!" Ellie's voice was thick. "Please!" Her parents exchanged a glance over her head. Her father rubbed his forehead, his tell when he was about to give in. "Ellie, he's going to be a big dog. Are you sure?" "Yes." No hesitation. No doubt. Just absolute certainty ringing in that single syllable. Her mother's lips curved into a smile. She'd seen it the moment Ellie sat down, that unshakable connection. "Then let's take him home." The words hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. Home. Leo's eyes flew open. His tail, for the first time in weeks, gave a tentative wag. Just one. But it was enough. Ellie pressed her forehead against the kennel bars, her tears warm against the cold metal. She didn't know how to explain what she felt in that moment, only that something inside her chest had clicked into place, like the last piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was missing. And when Leo licked her fingers through the bars, his tongue rough and warm, she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, he felt it too. The world had become a whirlwind of unfamiliar sensations, each one crashing over Leo like waves against shore. First came the leash, a strange, alien pressure around his neck that made him want to scratch at it with his hind paw. The shelter workers had put one on him before during walks, but this felt different. This wasn't temporary. This was forever. The nylon strap bore a shiny new tag that clinked softly with every movement, the sound foreign and startling. Then came the car. The moment the door opened, a wall of strange smells assaulted Leo's nose. Leather seats polished to a high sheen, the faint tang of old coffee spills, the crisp bite of winter air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror. But beneath it all, weaving through everything else, was Ellie. Her scent clung to the fabric of the back seat, a comforting thread in this tapestry of newness. "Easy, boy," Ellie's father murmured as he guided Leo onto the seat. The puppy's claws scrabbled against the smooth leather, his legs trembling with the effort to stay upright as the car shifted beneath him. And then, the engine roared to life. Leo's entire body stiffened. The vibrations traveled up through his paws, rattling his bones. His ears flattened against his skull as the shelter, the only home he'd known for weeks, began to shrink in the rear window. A whine built in his throat, high and thin. That's when Ellie climbed in beside him. The moment her weight settled on the seat, Leo collapsed against her, his whole body shaking. He didn't understand this metal beast that growled and moved on its own. Didn't understand where they were taking him. But he understood her, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the warmth radiating from her small body. "You're okay. You're okay," Ellie whispered, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Her fingers found the spot behind his ears, scratching gently in that way that made his hind leg twitch. Leo pressed closer, burying his face in the fabric of her jacket. Up close, Ellie's scent was a universe unto itself. The sugary sweetness of the cereal she'd eaten for breakfast, the green freshness of grass stains on her knees, something uniquely her that Leo couldn't name but would recognize anywhere. The car turned a corner, and Leo's stomach lurched. A fresh wave of tremors racked his body. Ellie didn't hesitate. She maneuvered him carefully until his head rested in her lap, her entire upper body curving over him like a living shield. "Look," she murmured, pointing out the window. "See the trees? We're almost home." Leo didn't understand the words, but the cadence of her voice soothed him nonetheless. Tentatively, he lifted his gaze to the window. The world outside was a blur of color and motion, flashing streetlights, towering buildings giving way to houses with glowing windows. Each one a tiny universe where families lived and loved. And now he would have that too. Ellie giggled suddenly as Leo's cold nose found the sensitive spot beneath her ear. "You're mine now, okay?" she whispered, her breath warm against the top of his head. "Forever." The words settled over Leo like a physical weight, warm and comforting. In the shelter, time had been measured in meals and empty kennels. But forever? That was something entirely new. That was a promise written in starlight. As if sensing his thoughts, Ellie hugged him tighter, her cheek resting between his ears. The steady thump-thump of her heartbeat against his side became his anchor, a rhythm more familiar than his own breathing. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars honked, traffic lights changed. But inside this little bubble of warmth and safety, time seemed to slow. Leo's trembling gradually subsided. His muscles, tense with fear, began to relax. By the time the car turned onto a quiet street lined with oak trees, Leo's eyes had grown heavy. The adrenaline that had fueled him was ebbing away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. His last conscious thought as sleep claimed him was of Ellie's fingers stroking his fur, and the whispered words that followed him into dreams. "Welcome home, Leo." The house breathed differently at night. Leo noticed it first, the way the refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, a steady vibration that thrummed through the floorboards. The ticking of a clock in the hallway, each second marked with surgical precision. The occasional creak of the house settling, like an old man shifting in his sleep. Ellie's parents moved through the evening with cautious optimism. They'd laid out newspaper by the back door. "Just in case," her father muttered. They'd tucked away shoes and remote controls behind cabinet doors. They'd even prepared a spray bottle of water. "For discipline," her mother explained, though the way her fingers trembled as she set it on the counter betrayed her hope she wouldn't need it. But Leo had no interest in chaos. He moved through the unfamiliar house like a silent ghost, his paws making no sound on the hardwood floors. Where Ellie went, he followed, always exactly 2 steps behind, his nose occasionally brushing the back of her hand as if to verify she hadn't dissolved into smoke. When she paused to pet him, his entire body would freeze, his amber eyes widening slightly as if he couldn't quite believe this kindness was meant for him. As evening deepened, Ellie curled up on the couch with a book. Leo didn't jump up beside her. Instead, he sat at her feet, his chin resting on the cushion, watching her with quiet intensity. When she patted her lap, he hesitated for 3 full heartbeats before carefully, so carefully, resting his head there. Ellie's fingers found the spot behind his ears almost instinctively. Leo's eyes fluttered shut, a soft sigh escaping him. His breath warmed her jeans, his whiskers tickling her thigh. "See?" Ellie whispered to her parents over his head. "He's perfect." Her parents exchanged a glance, the kind that held entire conversations without words. Her mother's shoulders relaxed slightly. The spray bottle remained untouched. Night fell properly then, painting the windows black. Ellie's bedtime routine sent Leo into mild panic. His ears pinned back as she disappeared into the bathroom, his body tense until she re-emerged in pajamas dotted with stars. When she headed down the hallway, he trotted after her, his nails clicking against the hardwood. Then, a crisis. Ellie's bedroom door stood open, her bed neatly made. But Leo's new dog bed waited in the living room, plush and untouched. Ellie didn't hesitate. With a grunt, she dragged her pillow and comforter off the bed, the fabric leaving whisper-soft trails across the floor. She arranged them in a nest-like pile right beside Leo's bed, then flopped down with dramatic flair. "I'm sleeping with you," she announced, as if daring the universe to contradict her. Her mother appeared in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the hallway light. "Honey, he might not be used to—" But Leo was already moving. He circled twice, then settled himself around Ellie's curled form like a living fortress. His back pressed against her spine, his tail curving to cradle her feet. When Ellie shifted to face him, he adjusted instantly, tucking his muzzle against her chest in a way that made her heart stutter. Ellie buried her fingers in the thick fur at his neck. Up close, he smelled like the shelter shampoo, clinical and floral, but beneath it, something warmer was emerging. Something that smelled like sunshine and safety and them. "Good night, Leo," she murmured, her breath stirring the fur between his ears. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind of deep quiet that exists between souls who understand each other beyond words. Then, a sound, software tentative. Thump. Ellie's eyes flew open. Thump, thump. Leo's tail moved again, a slow, sweeping motion that brushed against the comforter. Not the frantic wagging of overexcited puppies in YouTube videos, but something more profound, more considered. Each movement seemed deliberate, as if he was rediscovering a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Ellie's vision blurred. Hot tears spilled over, tracing warm paths down her temples and into her hairline. "You do love me," she whispered, the words cracking under the weight of their truth. Leo responded by stretching forward, his cold nose bumping against her cheek before his warm tongue followed, sweeping away her tears in one rough, perfect gesture. "Of course I do." Outside, a car passed by, its headlights painting fleeting golden rectangles across the ceiling. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. The refrigerator cycled on with a quiet hum. But in that little nest on the floor, time seemed to slow. Ellie's breathing deepened, her fingers relaxing in Leo's fur. Leo's tail gave one final contented thump against the blankets before stilling. As sleep pulled them under, one truth echoed in both their hearts, as clear as if they'd spoken it aloud. This wasn't an ending. It was the first page of their story.